The throaty growl of the Vate engine was David Miller's Saturday morning symphony. His meticulously restored '68 Mustang, a flash of Highland green against the manicured backdrop of Whispering Oaks Estates, was more than metal and horsepower. It was a tether to a less constrained time, his principal escape hatch from the subdivision's often suffocating embrace of quiet conformity. Whispering Oaks prided itself on order, a state enforced with the unwavering vigilance of the Homeowners Association, personified most intensely by board member Carol Bishop. Carol, a woman whose sharp features seemed perpetually aligned in disapproval, treated any rippling, her prescribed pond of suburban tranquility, as a personal affront. Children's laughter deemed too loud, recycling bins sorted incorrectly, mailboxes deviating by a fraction from the approved design, all fell under her hawk-like gaze. Her true obsession, however, seemed to be the flow, or rather the perceived speed, of traffic on the winding private roads. She patrolled in her near-silent electric golf cart, clipboard perpetually at the ready, possessing an almost supernatural ability to detect speeding, often based solely on an engine's sound striking her as unnecessarily aggressive. David's Mustang, with its resonant Vate heartbeat, was, in Carol Bishop's judgment, the prime offender. Whispering Oaks Lane, the short, tree-canopied private road serving David's house and only 3 others, had become the unfortunate focal point of her campaign. Despite the clearly posted 25 mph speed limit, a limit David consciously, almost religiously, adhered to, the board member insisted vehicles, his, primarily, were racing down the lane. She spoke of endangered pedestrians, though sightings of anyone walking on their secluded cul-de-sac were rare, and lamented the unacceptable noise pollution. There had been notes tucked under his wiper blades, pointed barbs launched across crowded rooms at HOA meetings, and impromptu, lengthy lectures on road safety whenever she managed to corner him during his rare appearances at neighborhood barbecues. David had always countered with polite deflection, confident her complaints were groundless, fueled perhaps by a personal distaste for the classic car, or maybe for his quieter lifestyle, single, immersed in long hours as a software architect, largely opting out of the community's chattering social rituals. Did she just hate the sound? Or was it something more personal? He often wondered. The simmering tension boiled over dramatically following the last HOA board meeting, citing a nebulous collection of vague, conveniently anonymous complaints about speeding and arcless driving patterns, specifically on Whispering Oaks Lane. Carol had passionately proposed a traffic calming measure. David, unfortunately, had been stranded by flight delays on a crucial business trip. He'd missed the meeting, missed the chance to object. He returned home to find an official-looking notice slipped into his mail slot. It coolly informed residents of the board's decision and the imminent installation of a speed bump on their lane, decreed necessary for enhanced community safety. He knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his gut, precisely who this enhanced safety was aimed at. His certainty solidified into angry confirmation when the installation crew arrived a week later. They installed not a gentle asphalt curve, but a brutally aggressive, high-profile black rubber speed bump, the kind clearly designed to force vehicles down to an agonizing crawl, and its placement felt surgically precise in its malice. It wasn't positioned neutrally. It sat squarely midway down the lane, intersecting precisely where David's driveway met the road. Maximum, unavoidable inconvenience for him, minimal impact on the other 3 households situated either before the bump or further down the lane. The first time David eased the Mustang towards it, moving at barely 5 miles per hour, The sickening scrape of the front spoiler against the unyielding rubber echoed in the quiet morning air. Damn her. A jarring thud resonated through the car's meticulously restored frame. Even driving his practical daily sedan over it, while less damaging, was jarring and unpleasant. It wasn't traffic calming. It was punitive. It was targeted. It was infuriatingly personal. That evening, frustration simmering, David bypassed polite conversation and drafted a formal, sharply worded complaint to the full HOA board. He detailed the low traffic volume on their specific lane, citing the utter lack of any documented speeding incidents, citations, or accidents. He argued the aggressive design of the bump itself was likely non-compliant with standard specifications for low-traffic residential roads. He highlighted, unemotionally but firmly, its demonstrably biased placement, disproportionately impacting his access compared to his neighbors. He formally requested its immediate removal. The response arrived with insulting swiftness, penned by Carol Bishop herself in her capacity as head of the HOA Safety Committee. "The board appreciates your input, Mr. Miller," the letter began, each word dripping with condescending formality. "Appreciates my input? Like hell she does. However," it continued, "the safety and well-being of all Whispering Oaks residents remains our paramount concern." The traffic calming measure was installed following careful consideration of resident feedback and is deemed a necessary tool to ensure consistent adherence to posted speed limits. It concluded, its placement was determined by engineering recommendations to achieve maximum effectiveness. The measure will remain in place. Engineering recommendations? David scoffed inwardly. Whose? The guy who sold her the damn thing? He doubted any certified traffic engineer had set foot in their lane. This had Carol's fingerprints all over it. He saw her later that day, making her rounds. She deliberately slowed her golf cart as she passed the newly installed obstacle, casting a long, satisfied glance towards his house. A small, smug smile played on her lips. It was the look of victory. A cold knot of anger tightened in David's stomach. He considered the predictable routes, another appeal to the full board, attempting to rally his neighborson, the lane, who expressed mild annoyance, but showed zero appetite for confronting the formidable Mrs. Bishop, Hiringa Standard HOA lawyer, for a likely protracted and expensive fight over bylaws. He knew, instinctively, that path would be a draining, uphill battle against Carol's entrenched influence and the board's inertia. She would likely bury him in procedure and delays. He needed something else, a different angle, something unexpected, something she wouldn't see coming. That night, instead of fuming, he started digging. Fueled by coffee and righteous indignation, he plunged into the digital archives of county property records, poring over the original Whispering Oaks Estates development plans from decades ago, scrutinizing the fine print of the HOA's incorporation documents. He focused intently on Whispering Oaks Lane itself. He noted that most other roads within the sprawling development had been formally dedicated to the county years prior, shifting maintenance responsibilities and confirming public access. But Whispering Oaks Lane, perhaps overlooked due to its short length, its cul-de-sac nature, and the limited number of homes it served, seemed different. The records were strangely opaque. It appeared clearly on the original plat maps, designated as a private road, ostensibly part of the development's common area. Yet, he could find no clear, unambiguous record of its formal transfer of title to the HOA entity itself. No deed of dedication to the county. It seemed to exist in a peculiar legal twilight zone, maintained by the HOA through assessments levied on residents like him, used daily. But its actual legal ownership remained stubbornly ambiguous. This ambiguity wasn't just a historical footnote. It sparked an idea. Audacious, complex, potentially ruinously expensive, but potentially a game changer. What if, the thought began, tentative at first, then gaining momentum? What if the land beneath that asphalt was never properly conveyed? What if title never legally vested in the HOA? What if ownership technically still resided with the original development corporation, now long defunct, or perhaps, through some quirk of property law, reverted fractionally, almost invisibly, to the owners of the properties directly abutting the lane? The implications were staggering. He booked an urgent consultation with Alex Sharma, a real estate attorney whose name surfaced repeatedly in online forums discussing complex property disputes and notoriously difficult HOA conflicts. Sharma had a reputation for creative, aggressive strategies. David laid out the entire saga in Sharma's quiet, book-lined office. The Mustang, the relentless board member, the targeted speed bump, the infuriatingly dismissive response, and finally, his late-night research into the road's questionable legal status. Alex Sharma listened intently, leaning forward slightly, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow as he reviewed the plat maps and documents David had brought. Interesting, Sharma mused finally, tapping a silver pen against the thick file. Very interesting indeed, Mr. Miller. This scenario, ambiguous ownership of private roads in older developments, it happens far more often than most people realize. He explained, developers go bankrupt mid-project, paperwork gets lost in transitions, formal dedications required by the county, sometimes just, fall through the cracks. If Whispering Oaks Lane was never formally dedicated for public use, and crucially, if there's no clean deed transferring ownership specifically to the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA, he paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Then its ownership status could be fragmented, unclear, or potentially still vested in the original landowner, the developer. And if that developer is defunct, dissolved? David prompted, leaning forward himself now, sensing a potential path opening. If the corporation is truly defunct, Alex confirmed, then its residual assets, including potentially overlooked parcels of land like this roadbed, might be controlled by a court-appointed receiver, or potentially, depending on state law and the specifics of the dissolution, its claims might be considered abandoned, opening other avenues. He continued, alternatively, if ownership defaults to abutting landowners, then you and your 3 neighbors might collectively hold fractional, undivided interests in the land beneath the pavement. So, what's the opportunity? David asked, his pulse quickening slightly. The opportunity, Alex said, a spark of professional interest in his eyes, is to potentially untangle this mess and acquire clear, undisputed title to the land parcel that constitutes Whispering Oaks Lane, in your name. David felt a jolt. Buy the road? Effectively, yes, Alex affirmed. It would be a significant undertaking, a legal maze. We'd need exhaustive title searches going back decades. We might need to track down successors or receivers for that defunct development company. We might need to negotiate buyouts or obtain quitclaim deeds from your abutting neighbors if fractional ownership is the reality, he cautioned. It would be expensive, potentially very expensive, time-consuming, certainly, and there's absolutely no guarantee of success. These things can get incredibly complex. But, Alex concluded, holding David's gaze. If we could establish clear title to that lane in your name, then the HOA would have zero jurisdiction over it, David finished, the audaciousness of the idea starting to coalesce into a concrete strategy. A slow, determined grin began to spread across his face. They couldn't install speed bumps, dictate rules, anything? Precisely, Alex confirmed. You would own the road. As the private owner, you could maintain it to reasonable standards, set appropriate rules for its use, like the existing speed limit, and, most importantly, you would have the absolute right to remove any unauthorized encroachments or obstructions. Like, for instance, he added, a slight smile touching his lips, a certain recently installed, aggressively profiled speed bump. The potential cost was daunting. Tens of thousands, maybe even crossing into six figures, factoring in legal fees, investigator costs, title insurance, and potential acquisition payments. It seemed an absurd amount of money and effort just to get rid of one annoying speed bump. But as David sat there, the smug image of Carol Bishop's face flashed in his mind. The scraping sound of his car's spoiler, the dismissive tone of the HOA letter. It wasn't just about the speed bump anymore. It was about the principle. It was about pushing back against arbitrary power wielded with personal malice. It was about reclaiming control over his own property, his access, his peace of mind. It was about drawing a line. This stops here. Let's do it, David said, the decision solidifying with surprising firmness in his mind. The cost felt secondary now to the necessity of action. Find out what it takes. Start the process. The next 6 months were an immersion into a world David never knew existed, a labyrinth of dusty deed books, faded plat maps, complex corporate dissolution statutes, and intricate property law. Alex Sharma and his team worked diligently, commissioning deep-level title searches that peeled back layers of Whispering Oak's history. They unearthed forgotten agreements, mapped out convoluted chains of title, and ultimately confirmed David's initial suspicion: Whispering Oaks Lane had, indeed, fallen through the cracks. No formal dedication, no clean transfer to the HOA. Ownership appeared technically frozen, still vested in the legal shell of long-defunct Oak Knoll Development Corporation. Tracking down the current legal successor or court-appointed receiver for this ghost corporation required hiring specialist investigators, who eventually located a semi-retired lawyer in another state appointed years ago to manage the dwindling, problematic residual assets. Simultaneously, following Alex's strategic advice, David cautiously approached his neighbors on the lane to explore acquiring any potential fractional interest they might hold. It was a delicate dance. Two of the neighbors, though mildly inconvenienced by the speed bump and harboring no particular fondness for Carol Bishop, were initially wary of getting involved in a conflict. David, through Alex, offered them significant compensation, far exceeding any theoretical value of their fractional sliver of the roadbed, essentially paying a premium for their cooperation and their signatures on quitclaim deeds. After much deliberation and consultation with their own counsel, they agreed, formally relinquishing any potential claim to the roadland in favor of David. The third neighbor, however, known to be a staunch ally and friend of Carol's, flatly refused any discussion, immediately reporting David's underhanded attempt to buy the road back to Carol. This complicated matters, but didn't derail the strategy. The crucial breakthrough arrived weeks later. The court-appointed receiver for the defunct Oak Knoll Development Corp., contacted by Alex Sharma, proved surprisingly receptive. His duty was to wind down the corporation's affairs and dispose of remaining assets, however obscure. The receiver saw Whispering Oaks Lane not as valuable real estate, but as a potential lingering liability, a piece of land someone else maintained but for which the defunct entity might theoretically still hold some responsibility. After brief negotiations, the receiver agreed to sell and convey the corporation's entire residual interest in the Whispering Oaks Lane land parcel to David Miller for a sum that felt almost anticlimactic after the months of complex legal work. The receiver was simply glad to sign off on it, washing his hands of the obscure asset. With the receiver's deed now properly recorded, coupled with the quitclaim deed secured from 2 of his 3 neighbors, David Miller now held the vast, controlling majority of the legal interest in the land beneath Whispering Oaks Lane. The 3rd neighbor's refusal to cooperate meant David didn't have 100% undisputed interest. But Alex Sharma assured him his controlling share was more than sufficient under state law to assert effective ownership, management rights, and, crucially, the right to control access and remove obstructions from the private road. The legal foundation was laid. David Miller, at considerable personnel expense and through sheer dogged persistence, was now, for all practical purposes, the owner of his own street. He chose his moment carefully. He kept the finalization of the deeds and his newfound ownership quiet, continuing to endure the daily thud and scrape over the speed bump. He paid his HOA dues without comment, even the portion notionally allocated for private road maintenance, savoring the private irony. He needed everything to be perfectly in place before making his move. Finally, the day arrived. Weeks after the final deed was recorded, David scheduled the work. He hired a reputable local roadworks contractor, coincidentally, the same company the HOA frequently used for pothole repairs, instructing them to arrive early on a quiet Tuesday morning. He had already secured the necessary low-level county permits required for private road surface repair activities, a description deliberately chosen for its bland vagueness. As dawn broke over the still sleeping houses of Whispering Oaks, the contractor's crew arrived promptly. Working with quiet efficiency, they began the process of removing the offending rubber speed bump. The bolts were unfastened. The heavy rubber segments were lifted away. The asphalt underneath was meticulously patched, smoothed, and sealed, leaving a seamless, unblemished surface where the obstruction had been just minutes before. David stood near his driveway, sipping coffee, observing the entire operation. A profound sense of quiet, deeply satisfying vindication washed over him, eclipsing the months of stress and the significant dent in his savings. It was worth it. By mid-morning, the bump was completely gone, vanished. In its place, as per David's instructions, the contractor installed 2 new signs, custom-made, elegant, mirroring the official style of other signage in the development, yet carrying a drastically different message. At the entrance to Whispering Oaks Lane, where it branched off the main development road, the first sign read, Whispering Oaks Lane, Private Road, Property of D. Miller access restricted to resides and authorized guests, only no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted further down the lane. Near the now smooth patch of asphalt, where the speed bump had inflicted its daily toll, a second, simpler sign was installed. Speed limit 25 mph per battalion road. He hadn't abolished rules. He had simply removed the HOA's punitive, unauthorized installation and reaffirmed the original reasonable speed limit under his own authority. He also had the contractor discreetly install the underground preparations and anchor points for a simple, tasteful electronic gate system at the entrance, an option for the future, a visible reminder of his control, though he had no immediate plans to activate it. The neighborhood's reaction was almost instantaneous. His two cooperative neighbors emerged from their houses, blinking in the morning sun, looks of surprised curiosity morphing into subtle, pleased smiles as they saw the bump gone and read the new signs. The third neighbor, Carol's ally, appeared moments later, stared in open-mouthed disbelief at the smooth asphalt, read the signs with growing horror, and then scurried back inside. Phone already pressed to hear our. Carol Bishop arrived less than 20 minutes later. Her golf cart skidded to an abrupt halt at the entrance of the lane, narrowly avoiding a collision with the contractor's departing equipment truck. She practically leaped out, her face a mask of apoplectic rage, and marched directly towards David, who was calmly running his hand over the smooth, newly patched asphalt. "Miller, what in God's name is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. She pointed a trembling, accusing finger, oscillating between the new signs and the empty space where her speed bump had proudly stood. "Who authorized this vandalism?" "You put that safety device back immediately." "Good morning, Carol," David replied, his voice deliberately pleasant, turning slowly to face her. "He needed to stay calm. Factual. There seems to be a significant misunderstanding on your part," he gestured encompassingly. "This is Whispering Oaks Lane. As of recently, it's my private property." Your private property?" Carol sputtered the words as if they were nonsensical, looking genuinely bewildered, as if the concept was impossible. "Don't be utterly absurd. Miller, this is an HOA common area road. You cannot just remove board-approved safety installations whenever you feel like it." "Actually, Carol, it's not an HOA road," David informed her, his voice remaining level, though a thread of steel entered his tone. "And it likely never was. Legally speaking," he explained calmly, "through extensive legal research, title curative actions, and property acquisition, I have successfully established clear, recorded title to the land parcel comprising Whispering Oaks Lane. The original developers, it seems, never properly dedicated it to the county or legally transferred ownership to the HOA." He gestured towards the prominent new signs. "It's private land, my private road. Therefore, the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA has absolutely no legal authority to install speed bumps, dictate traffic regulations, or exercise any control whatsoever over this property." He met her stunned, furious gaze. "I removed an unauthorized, improperly installed obstruction from my own land, and I have posted the appropriate signage indicating private ownership and reaffirming the original legal speed limit." Carol stared at him, then wildly at the signs, then back at David, her mind visibly struggling to grasp the reality of what he was saying. You bought the road?" Her voice was a choked whisper of disbelief mixed with boiling rage. "You can't do that!" "Apparently," David said dryly, "I can, and I did." He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a neatly folded document, a concise summary prepared by Alex Sharma, outlining the title acquisition process, citing deed recording numbers. "My attorney, Mr. Sharma, has already dispatched formal notification of this change in ownership, along with comprehensive supporting documentation, via courier and certified mail to the HOA board president and the HOA's retained legal counsel this morning," David stated. I strongly advise you to consult with them before making any further demands, issuing any threats, or indeed, he added, his gaze hardening pointedly, continuing to trespass on my private property. Carol snatched the proffered paper from his hand, her eyes scanning the dense text furiously. The official language, the references to deeds, quitclaims, and recorded instruments seemed to momentarily overwhelm her, stunning her into silence. But her innate belligerence quickly resurfaced. This is outrageous! Some kind of legal trick, a loophole. The HOA will fight this tooth and nail. You've created a dangerous hazard. We will sue you. Miller, we will force you to put that bump back where it belongs. You are certainly welcome to try, Carol, David said, letting a hint of weariness color his voice. He hadn't wanted this fight, but she had forced his hand. But I suspect you'll find the HOA has precisely zero legal standing to sue over activities on land it does not own. This road is mine. He took a deliberate step back. Now, I must insist that you remove yourself from my property immediately. I am an elected HOA board member investigating unauthorized destruction of HOA property. She shot back, puffing herself up with residual authority. You are an individual trespassing on private land, David countered firmly. Leave now. Or, as the sign clearly indicates, I will contact the sheriff's department and have you removed. Carol glared at him, her face flushed, hands clenched at her sides. She was radiating impotent fury. She crumpled the legal summary in her fist, a strangled noise escaping her throat. Knowing she held no physical power here, realizing, perhaps, the ground had fundamentally shifted beneath her, she spun around abruptly, stomped back to her waiting golf cart, and sped away, kicking up loose gravel in her wake. David watched the golf cart disappear around the bend. The silencer returning to the lane, now blessedly smooth. He didn't feel triumphant, just tired and apprehensive. He knew Carol Bishop. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The real battle, the legal one she had threatened, was likely just beginning. Alex Sharma's formal notification package, thick with deeds, title reports, and legal analysis, landed like a small explosive device in the HOA's management office. An emergency board meeting was convened that very evening. Carol, predictably, dominated the proceedings, delivering a passionate, bordering on hysterical diatribe. She painted David as a reckless rogue, a danger to children, a scofflaw challenging the very foundations of their community's order and the HOA's legitimate authority. She vehemently insisted his claim of ownership must be fraudulent, based on obscure loopholes that their lawyers could surely overturn. She demanded immediate aggressive legal action. Despite the clear, extensive documentation provided by Alex Sharma, and likely against the increasingly nervous advice of their own retained counsel, who recognized the weakness of their position, the HOA board ultimately succumbed. Swayed by Carol Bishop's force of personality, her dire warnings of setting dangerous precedents, and perhaps fearful of appearing ineffective, they voted to file suit against David Miller. The lawsuit was sweeping. It sought a court judgment invalidating David's claim of ownership entirely. It demanded the court declare Whispering Oaks Lane to be, and to have always been, HOA common property by virtue of historical usage and maintenance. It sought an injunction forcing David to immediately reinstall speed bump at his own expense. And it requested significant monetary damages and fines levied against David for his unauthorized removal of essential HOA safety property and violations of community signage standards. Alex Sharma greeted the news of the lawsuit with calm confidence. Let them file, he told David during a phone call. Their entire case is constructed from assumptions, wishful thinking, and Carol Bishop's personal outrage. It lacks a sound legal foundation. He elaborated, "We possess the recorded deeds, the clear chain of title history, the signed quitclaims from other abutting owners. They possess historical maintenance receipts and a profound desire for things to be as they always assumed they were. We'll file our response denying their claims, and we'll file a robust counterclaim." The counterclaim Alex drafted was indeed robust. It sought immediate dismissal of the HOA's baseless suit. It formally petitioned the court for a declaratory judgment unequivocally confirming David Miller's sole ownership and control of Whispering Oaks Lane, and it sought substantial damages against the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA and against Carol Bishop personally. The damages enumerated included full cost David incurred in removing the improperly and illegally installed speed bump, compensation for the diminished use, enjoyment, and potential property value impact David suffered while the obstruction was present, legal fees incurred defending against the HOA's frivolous lawsuit, arguing it constituted abuse of process, and, significantly, punitive damages specifically citing the targeted, malicious, and harassing nature of Carol Bishop's actions undertaken under the color of her HOA authority. The legal gears began to grind, slowly and expensively. Months crawled by, marked by motions, responses, and the discovery process. Depositions were scheduled and taken under oath. Carol Bishop, questioned for hours by Alex Sharma, struggled mightily to justify the speed bump with concrete evidence. She repeatedly fell back on vague safety concerns and subjective complaints about the disruptive noises of David's classic car. Crucially, she could not produce the specific anonymous resident complaints she had originally cited to the board to justify the measure. Under Sharma's relentless, precise questioning about the road's ownership documentation, or lack thereof, her assertions that David's claim was invalid dissolved into angry bluster, speculation, and hearsay. She became increasingly flustered, hostile, and contradictory, making a visibly poor impression recorded by the court stenographer. David, during his own deposition, remained calm, sticking strictly to the documented facts, the timeline of events, and his meticulous research findings. His two neighbors who had signed the quitclaim deeds provided testimony, corroborating David's account of the road's historically ambiguous status and confirming their perception that the speed bump felt specifically targeted at David's property access. The discovery process yielded even more potent ammunition for David's counterclaim. Internal HOA emails, reluctantly produced under subpoena, revealed Carol Bishop's relentless, almost obsessive campaign pushing for the speed bump installation, specifically demanding its placement, directly impacting David's driveway. These emails showed her overriding procedural questions and even initial cost concerns raised by other, more cautious board members. Furthermore, financial records obtained during discovery showed the HOA had paid a significant premium for the specific high-profile, aggressive rubber bump model Carol had insisted upon, lending credence to the argument it wasn't a standard, neutrally chosen safety device but a custom order intended for maximum impact. More troublingly for the HOA, irregularities began to surface in their accounting records related to general road maintenance funds, particularly invoices associated with minor patching work done on Whispering Oaks Lane before David's ownership claim surfaced. Some invoices appeared inflated, poorly documented, or signed off solely by Carol, hinting at potential financial mismanagement or worse, lurking beneath the surface, conducted under her dual oversight of the Safety and Finance Committees. Faced with the mountain of concrete evidence supporting David's ownership claim, the damaging deposition testimony, and the potentially explosive financial irregularities uncovered during discovery, the HOA's own lawyers almost certainly advised the board, in increasingly urgent tones, to cut their losses and seek a settlement. But Carol Bishop, according to whispers filtering through the neighborhood, remained intransigent. She reportedly refused even to consider settlement talks, insisting they fight David Miller all the way to a courtroom verdict. She remained utterly convinced, against all evidence, that a judge would see the inherent injustice of David's actions and rule in the HOA's favor, restoring her speed bump and validating her authority. The case proceeded to a bench trial, heard by a judge rather than a jury. The courtroom proceedings were dry, methodical, focused on documents and legal arguments. Alex Sharma calmly, systematically presented the evidence, the chain of title documentation, the recorded deeds from the receiver and the neighbors, expert testimony on state property law regarding abandoned or untransferred roadbeds, the photographic evidence of the bump's targeted placement. The HOA's lawyers countered, attempting to argue concepts like implied dedication based on the HOA's long-term maintenance of the lane or prescriptive easement through historical usage. But their arguments, while legally coherent in theory, lacked the necessary factual foundation and buckled against the weight of David's clearly documented, superior claim of legal title ownership. The judge's ruling, delivered from the bench after a short recess, was swift, clear, and decisive. He found unequivocally in favor of the defendant, David Miller. The judge affirmed David's legal ownership and right to control the land parcel, constituting Whispering Oaks Lane, free from interference by the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA. The HOA's lawsuit was dismissed in its entirety, with prejudice, meaning they could not refile it. The judge explicitly stated the HOA possessed no jurisdiction, easement rights, or authority whatsoever over David's private road. He then turned to David's counterclaims. He awarded David monetary damages sufficient to cover the documented cost of the speed bump removal. He also awarded David a significant portion, though not all, of his substantial legal fees, ruling that the HOA's lawsuit, particularly its continuation after the strength of David's evidence became clear, was substantially unjustified and bordered on frivolous. The judge stopped short of awarding punitive damages against Carol Bishop personally at that stage, but he issued a blistering reprimand from the bench directed squarely at her. He spoke sternly about the misuse of HOA board positions for personal vendettas, the importance of relying on facts rather than assumptions, and the potential consequences of bringing vexatious litigation before the court. The warning hung heavy in the silent courtroom. The judgment was a stunning public defeat for Carol Bishop and a significant financial blow to the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA, now liable for David's damages and their own considerable legal expenses. Word of the verdict spread rapidly. Residents, already uneasy about the escalating legal costs associated with Carol's crusade, were now openly furious. At the next HOA general meeting, the atmosphere was charged. Carol Bishop faced a barrage of angry questions about the failed lawsuit, the wasted funds, and her judgment. A motion for her immediate removal from the HOA board was quickly raised from the floor. It passed by an overwhelming, almost unanimous margin. Stripped of her power, her authority vanished, publicly discredited. Carol Bishop retreated into the confines of her meticulously maintained home. Her golf cart patrols ceased. She became a rare sight in the neighborhood she once ruled with an iron fist. But the humiliation, the loss of control, the public repudiation, it festered within her. The defeat gnawed at her sense of order, her sense of self. One moonless night, several weeks after the judgment, fueled by simmering bitterness and, reportedly, a significant amount of wine, Carol snapped. She took matters into her own hands in a final, desperate act of defiance. Under the cloak of darkness, she struggled to drag heavy landscape rock sandbags of garden debris from her own yard, depositing them onto the smooth asphalt of Whispering Oaks Lane, near the spot where her beloved speed bump had once stood. She created a crude, dangerous, makeshift barricade across part of the lane. As a final touch, she took a can of red spray paint and scrawled "Danger, slow down now," across David's elegant private road sign at the entrance. Unfortunately for Carol, her rage had blinded her to prudence. David, wary of potential retaliation following his court victory and acting on Alex Sharma's cautious advice, had discreetly installed several small, high-resolution, night vision security cameras overlooking the lane shortly after the judge's ruling. The cameras captured Carol's late-night activities with perfect clarity, her car parked hastily nearby, her face clearly visible in the infrared light, the deliberate, strenuous effort involved in dragging the rocks, the act of spray painting his sign. The evidence was irrefutable. David reviewed the footage the next morning with a sigh that was more weary than angry. He saved the video files and contacted the sheriff's department, providing them with the clear evidence of vandalism and the creation of a hazardous condition. Faced with incontrovertible video proof, Carol Bishop offered no defense. She was arrested and charged with felony vandalism due to the cost of sign replacement and road cleanup and misdemeanor creation of a public hazard on a private roadway. The criminal investigation into the vandalism served as a catalyst. Prompted by the evidence of Carol's malice and the financial irregularities hinted at during the discovery phase of the civil suit, the newly cautious HOA board, now eager to clean house and restore resident trust, initiated a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances, focusing specifically on funds managed by Carol during her tenure, particularly the road maintenance budget. The audit confirmed the worst suspicions raised during the civil litigation. It revealed a systematic pattern. Carol Bishop had routinely inflated invoices submitted by a favored landscaping and minor repairs contractor, approved substantial payments for road patching and sealing work that was either never performed or was grossly exaggerated, and had likely received kickbacks from this contractor over a period of several years. The amounts involved in each instance weren't enormous, but cumulatively, over time, they represented a significant embezzlement of HOA funds, cleverly masked by her outward persona of strict fiscal oversight and zealous rule enforcement. Carol Bishop now found herself facing not only the pending vandalism and public hazard charges, but also multiple felony counts of embezzlement and fraud related to her misuse of HOA funds. The weight of the evidence, the video of the vandalism, the meticulously documented findings of the forensic audit was crushing. Her trial on the financial charges was relatively swift. She was found guilty in all counts. The judge, reviewing the pre-sentencing report detailing the vandalism, the embezzlement, her prior judicial reprimand in the civil case, and citing her profound breach of trust towards her neighbors and her pattern of malicious behavior, handed down a sentence that sent ripples of shock through Whispering Oaks, but felt like long overdue justice to David and others who had felt the sting of her arbitrary power. Carol Bishop was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, to be followed by 3 years of supervised probation upon release. Crucially, she was ordered to pay full restitution to the Whispering Oaks Estates HOA for all embezzled funds, in addition to substantial court fines. To satisfy the court-ordered restitution and fines, liens were placed on her assets. Her large, showcase home in Whispering Oaks Estates, the command center from which she had surveyed her domain and launched her campaigns of petty tyranny, was eventually sold. Her savings were wiped out. The woman who had obsessed over minor infractions, speed bumps, and maintaining property values ultimately lost everything. Whispering Oaks Estates slowly exhaled, chastened and changed by the ordeal. The HOA implemented stricter financial controls, conflict of interest rules, and term limits for board members. Transparency became the new watchword. David Miller retained quiet, undisputed ownership and control of Whispering Oaks Lane. He entered into a simple, amicable maintenance agreement with HOA cooperative neighbors, establishing a small private fund to cover periodic sealing and upkeep, ensuring Therode remained in good repair, entirely separate from HOA oversight or funding. He never activated the electronic gate. It wasn't necessary. Sometimes, on a quiet Saturday morning, David would back the Mustang out of the garage, its V8 engine settling into a contented rumble. As he drove smoothly down the lane, feeling the seamless asphalt under the tires, unmarred by the jarring thud of Carol Bishop's vanquished speed bump, he would reflect on the sheer absurdity, the immense cost, and the unexpected trajectory of it all. He hadn't set out to buy a road, to wage legal war, or to bankrupt his neighbor. He had simply wanted to drive his classic car home without it being damaged, to live peacefully without being targeted by unchecked petty authority. Hay had fought for a principle, and the cost had been far higher than he ever anticipated, measured not just in dollars, but in time, stress, and the undeniable friction it created in his quiet life. Yet, as he turned onto the main road, leaving his private lane behind, the lingering scent of exhaust mingling with the scent of pines, David felt a sense of hard-won peace. The quiet on Whispering Oaks Lane was no longer the stifling, enforced silence of conformity Carol Bishop had craved. It was the genuine tranquility of resolution, of boundaries defended, of freedom reclaimed. And that, he decided, was worth the price.